Okay, so we're going to continue to talk about 9.2 here and get a little bit more in depth with our graphing. So previously when we started section 2, we had talked about how we can graph something by using the vertex and the y-intercept and that axis of symmetry point. And we're still going to talk about those same things in this section. Those have not gone away. We're still going to want to be able to find our vertex, find our axis of symmetry, our y-intercept point. All of that stuff, though, we already know how to do, and it works the same way as what we were doing earlier. What we're going to add on now to this section is we're going to start finding the solutions, finding our answers for x if we were to factor our equation, and start including those now on our graph too. So if you remember in section 1 when we talked about graphing for the first time, I talked about how where it crosses the x-axis, those are your solutions, and how sometimes you'll have one solution or two solutions. And so we're going to start to see like how we can find those solutions and add those to our graph to get us an even better picture of what these quadratics are going to look like. So just to remind you guys, when you're trying to find that axis of symmetry or you're trying to find your x-coordinate of your vertex, you're going to be using this equation here, that negative b or opposite of b over 2a. You're going to want to find your y-intercept, which is always the regular number at the very end of your equation. And what we're going to add on now is we're going to start solving these equations by setting them to zero, equal to 0, factoring them, and finding those x-intercepts, finding where it crosses the x-axis at. So the example I have here, y equals x squared plus 2x minus 8, just take note that that is the same thing if I put a 0 in for y, which we will actually do at the end here in order for us to be able to find those factors. But what I'm showing you guys that we're doing first is we're just solving for that x-intercept, or the axis of symmetry point, so finding your x to help you figure out what your vertex is, and then we're going to see how we can find our y-intercept as well, just like we did when we first started this section. So for this one, your a is a 1, your b is 2. Again, I'm just pulling that from my equation up here, so a, b, and c are still where they were before. We're plugging it into that negative b over 2a, so we've got negative 2 on top over 2 times a, which is 1. So this is going to be a negative 2 over 2, which simplifies to negative 1. And remember, that is your x value of your vertex. That's also that axis of symmetry, that imaginary line that cuts through the graph. If you remember what we did last section then, when we first started getting into section 2 here, is we then found our y by using that x value. So you can see how I'm putting in a negative 1 for those x's up above in that equation, and I'm evaluating it here. So when I do this negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1 minus 8, I get y equals negative 9. So in order for me to write my vertex, I take the x, which is negative 1, and I take my y, which is negative 9. We've already done this before, so that should not have been brand new information for you. Then to find your y-intercept, that's again when you think about setting all those x's equal to 0, or I said kind of a shortcut you can take is just to look at that very last number, because if I put zeros in here, I'm going to have 0 plus 0 and negative 8, so I'm going to be left with just the negative 8 because those are going to go away. And so we write that as 0, negative 8. So that's that y-intercept point that we had found. Now we're going to add on this next piece here, which is to actually find the factors, or to find the solutions of our equation. So remember how I said that y can be replaced with 0, and so you want to think about your factoring, which this is what you guys did in chapter 8. So remember, if you need to, like, set up yourself a little table where you want to multiply to that last number, which is a negative 8, and you want to add to that middle number, which is a 2. So you're trying to figure out what two numbers are going to do both of these things. So start thinking of factors of 8, 1 and 8, 2 and 4, those kind of things. In order to get this to work out so that they multiply to a negative 8, but they add to a 2, you're going to want to have a positive 4 and a negative 2. Because 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, but 4 plus negative 2 is positive 2. So right here in my parentheses, I'm going to do x plus 4 and x minus 2. Now also in chapter 8, when we were talking about factoring and all of that stuff, we worked on solving these. So after you had it factored, you were able to set each parenthesis set equal to 0 and solve for them. So if I put x plus 4 equal to 0, I would get negative 4, and x minus 2 equals 0, I would get 2. So remember, it just switches the signs of those points that you had found when you were factoring. So now what I can do is graph. I can graph my vertex from up above, my y-intercept, and now my two solutions, because these are going to be where they cross the x-axis at. So if I come down here from my graph, that vertex point that we found at the very beginning, we said was negative 1, negative 9. So way down here. Our y-intercept point was 0, negative 8. So that's right there. Which, again, that axis of symmetry point, that dotted line, we can still draw that in if that's helpful. You can reflect your y-intercept point. Right now it's 1 to the right, so we want to go 1 to the left. That's what we had done prior to now, what we've just added on. So now I'm going to graph these 2 points up here. So I'm going to have one at positive 2, 0, which would be to the right 2 from 0, 0. And then I'm going to go to the left 4 for that negative 4, 0 point. So I'm just adding on these couple of extra points to give me an even better idea of what this graph is going to look like. And again, when you go to connect your points, make sure that you've got those curved lines so that you're making a U shape. So on the next page, I've got some practice problems. Again, I want you to pause the video here if you're watching, try these problems on your own, and then when you're ready to see it get worked out, go ahead and resume the video. Alright, for this first one, your A is a 1, your B is a negative 4, your C is a negative 5. To find your axis of symmetry using this equation, you're going to do negative of negative 4. So that's going to change to positive, and it's going to be 2 over 1. This simplifies to a positive 2. Then you would plug that in to help you find your vertex. And I'm going to skip kind of showing me plugging all that in, but I'm basically taking 2 here and I'm putting it in for those x's. And so when I do that, I got negative 9. So my vertex would be 2, comma, negative 9. The y-intercept point is that C value at the very end. And remember, we always put a 0 in front. So 0, negative 5. Now, when I'm looking at my equation up here, I need to factor this. So when you're factoring, think about setting that equal to 0. I need 2 numbers that multiply to negative 5, but they need to add to a negative 4. Well, your only factors of 5 are 5 and 1. But now you have to figure out which one has to be positive, which one has to be negative. In order for you to get a negative 4 when you add, you're going to want 5 to be negative and the 1 to be positive. Then if you set those equal to 0, they switch their signs. So you get x equals 5, x equals negative 1. So if you like writing them as coordinates, it'd be 5, 0, negative 1, 0 for those 2 points. And now we should have everything that we need for us to graph this. So my vertex is at 2, negative 9. The y-intercept is at 0, negative 5. Which again, your axis of symmetry is coming right here through that vertex. So I can reflect that y-intercept point 2 over that green line. And then my other solutions here are those zeros that I found. So I've got 1 going 5 to the right and negative 1, which would be 1 to the left. And then we draw our graph in. Again, go ahead and pause the video and try this one, and then resume watching to see what it should have looked like. Starting out by identifying A, B, C. A is 1, B is negative 4, C is 3. Starting to find our vertex here, we're going to do negative of negative 4 over 2 times 1. which simplifies to 2. So that's the x-coordinate of the vertex. And then again, to find your y-coordinate, you're going to put 2's in for those x's up there. So you're going to do 2 squared minus 4 times 2 plus 3. For this one, you should have gotten -1 for the vertex. The y-intercept, that comes from that c value. So 0, 3 is our y-intercept here. And now we're going to set our equation equal to 0 and factor it. So two numbers that multiply to 3 and add to a -4, we need both of them to be negative, so -3 and -1. That way they multiply to a +3, but they'll add to that -4. We set these equal to 0, so it's going to flip their signs. So now we're back to a +3 and a +1, which as coordinates would be 3, 0, 1, 0. For your graph, your vertex, you should go to the right 2, down 1. Again, this is where the axis of symmetry is at. Y-intercept is up 3 on the y-axis, so I can reflect that point over on the other side there. And then I have a solution at 1, 0, which would be 1 to the left, and 3, 0, which would be 3 to the left. So the solutions actually show up in between the vertex and the y-intercept on this one. And then draw your graph in. And so that is what that one should have looked like.